Hello, everybody. This is Travis from Pumpkin Hill Radio. I just want to let you know that our Patreon, patreon.com/Pumpkin Hill Radio, is really shaping up over there. So if you like the content you hear on this channel, you're going to love what we got going on over there. And for our first 10 subscribers to our Patreon, it's only $1 a month to get in. That dollar buys you bonus episodes. It gets a sticker sent right to your door. You'll get shout-outs throughout the next episode of Pumpkin Hill Radio as you become the ghost co-host for that episode. All that and so much more at patreon.com/Pumpkin Hill Radio. What the hell else are you going to do with that dollar? Hello, my Night Owl friends, and welcome to a very special heritage episode of Pumpkin Hill Radio. We're going to be stepping away from our usual paranormal and high strange encounters to dig into a little bit of our shared American history. These are actually the restored and preserved tapes of my great-grandfather, Ove Guberud, and just a little bit of his experience with folk music. And he even goes into talking about his own grandma. It goes all the way back to the 1850s and so on. It's a really cool piece of history. It's totally different from what you're used to listening to on this channel, but turn it on if you want to give it a chance. I think you'll enjoy it. It's just a piece of history I think is cool to preserve, and I'm gonna put it here. Apparently my family's been behind the microphone for a little while longer than I even realized. So I might try to find a few more of his tapes if I can. I know there's other stuff that he did out there, some full folk like album recordings almost, just him rolling with the fiddle for a while. Until then, thanks for listening to Pumpkin Hill Radio. I hope you enjoyed this very special episode. I'm Travis Wyrmwood, and I'm going to throw it over to my great-grandfather now. So, enjoy.
Norwegian folk music in Minnesota. An interview with Ove Guberud from La Crescent, Minnesota. Recorded in Minneapolis, Minnesota, February 27th, 1971. The Guberud farm, that is located between Caledonia and Spring Grove?
Yeah, that's correct.
I think I've seen the barn there with the name on. Is that the home place?
Yeah, my grandfather immigrated to America about 1854. And at that time it was wild government land, occupied or trespassed by Indians a good deal. But he found himself a nice spot there, very nice land. However, one thing lacked on his place, no stream, no spring, no water. So he was a brave man that he settled down on that piece of property, that farm. It had about 240 acres altogether. But they tell us that in the years past, they had to drive their horses down to a little river called Sheldon River, which lies about 7 miles to the east of the farm. And by the time the cattle come back from getting the fill of water, they were just as thirsty as when they left. So they had a lot of hardship. Then, of course, the Indians at that time, they had more or less a path that they marched, and they put up their camp or stayed on top of the ridge. It was a very flat meadow where they stayed. So they did visit the old homestead off and on. In that time they were hungry for good baking and so on. So they tell us about when Grandma Guberud was baking donuts. The Indians looked in the window and saw what she was doing, so they made a line, marched in one by one in a straight line, and picked up one donut and walked out to the door, and they escaped. So they had a lot of stories that we could relate about the pioneer days of over 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm. When you think back now, as far as you can remember, what do you remember about music at home?
Well, my recollection might go back about 50, 60 years ago. My father bought the old homestead, the Guberud estate there. So it was necessary for him to employ help along on the farm. So he was in the habit of sending money to Norway that would pay the the fare across Atlantic and way into Minnesota, and then they in turn would stay on the place and work through the summer to pay for their immigration ticket.
Oh.
And those same people, all over that part of the country, did the same thing. So the result was we had many new members, new faces, and some of those people could play, and they brought along their violin, and they played certain pieces. So what we have to offer here would be a number of musical melodies that was brought over from Norway. Now all of these numbers were not on tape, were not on plate, they were not on music or notes of any kind. So every bit of that music was committed by memory.
Mm-hmm.
So for that reason we have these numbers now that we are about to play for you are musical melodies that has been committed to memory and played by these various numbers. Now we've been trying to explain the name of the party that were responsible for bringing that certain piece here, but it was played by others. You see, these old Norwegian newcomers were very brilliant when it comes to fiddle music, and they would teach their melodies to other members in that vicinity that would copy that, and they would play it. So in other words, that musical lessons were given from one member to another one. That's why we have those different melodies and written by certain artists.
Mm-hmm. So it was your grandfather, you say, that came from Norway then?
He came from Valdres, Norway.
Valdres,
Norway.
Uh-huh.
And his first job was to work in northern Wisconsin in what they call the pinery. That's the forest, timberland.
Mm.
So his first job was to cut down timber that was floated on the Mississippi River to the sawmills that was finally cut into lumber. But that was the next year. Then he did find out that he could purchase this government land across the river in Houston County, where so many people came at that time.
Mm-hmm. Was his name Guberud when he came from Norway? Was
His
that the
name
original
was
name?
Gulbrand Anderson Guberud.
Oh.
You see, at that time, some of those Norwegians were a little timid about the pronunciation of their names, so that Guberud was more or less difficult to pronounce correctly, and the Yankees, they say, laughed at him. So he thought he'd fix that, so he took his father's name and added a son to it, so he became Anderson.
Oh.
Well, that went on for several years, but the result was that half the family would use Anderson and the other half would be Guberud.
Oh.
Well, then our schoolmaster, which was the center of knowledge, and he was the one that would understand something about law, he said that now, boys and girls, this cannot go on like this. You, after all, you are brothers and sisters, belong to the same family, and you should not have two names. Therefore, you should take a vote now in deciding what to use, Guberud or Anderson. And the result of the great election was that they were to be called Guberud.
Oh, uh-huh. Did he come over alone, or did he bring brothers with, or his wife with?
He was the ambitious one, and he came all by himself. And that goes back to about 1880. Yeah, 1880.
Mm-hmm.
And he found the conditions here in America so great, so wonderful, such a great progress to what they had in Norway, that he saved his money and he sent money back to bring his two brothers and a sister. That was Martin and Østien Guberud, and Olia Guberud, who became Mrs. Bucken. And then after that, he was able to get his parents to come over, and their name was Anders and Kersti. His father's name was Anders, his mother's name was Kersti, and he built them a small cottage on his own farm so that they could live there close to him, to his place, when they were here.
Mm-hmm. Now, in the very early days, you apparently then heard a lot of music at home. You say a lot of the hired men played. Was your father a musician too?
I can't help but be amused when I can recollect and reminisce about the great times we had. It was quite frequent that we had get-together parties, either at home or perhaps a special place, a Bowery dance, something like that. So we had to have music in order to entertain the boys and girls that came to those various get-togethers. So the result was they would have one fiddler and one organ, or perhaps after a while it got to be piano. But the orchestra consisted of one fiddle, one violin, that is, one fiddle, and one organ. And they had been able to pick up and remember and learn some of those melodies that was brought over by the newcomers. And that constituted our music for many years now. I could go back maybe 45, 50 years ago. Mm-hmm. They produced that wonderful music, which we are now trying to portray to you. And the reason is we like to
preserve it.
Preserve it. That's what I try to say now. Preserve it for the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did they? There must have been some accordion players around too. Do you remember if there were any?
Oh, we had trekkspill.
Yeah.
That's accordion music, but they were not able to imitate the real musical melody as well. And of course, the accordions those days were not as intricate and so completely melodious as they are today.
Yeah.
Therefore, they were not able to reproduce the actual melody that the violins could use. So they were not popular.
I see. How about guitar? Did you see many guitars?
After a while, it got to be quite customary that they add to the orchestra. In order to make it a two-piece orchestra, they made it a three-piece orchestra. Therefore, they had one violin and a piano or organ, and then a guitar that would play the afterbeats or fill in the parts as come.
I imagine many times you'd have more than one fiddler, though, wouldn't you?
Not as I recollect it. I'm talking about the old-fashioned barn dance, the old-fashioned home dances, the old-fashioned masquerade parties, and the Eurobook, Christmas fooling. Yeah. Then it was one fiddle and the piano. But later on, perhaps, let's go back about 15, 20 years ago, and then, of course, they added to it the banjo, guitar, and then perhaps they added to it a cornet or saxophone.
Yeah.
But we're talking about what happened, transpired about 65, 60 years ago.
Yeah. Did you hear any mouth organ played at that time?
Oh, yes. And that's quite lively to think about that. We had one boy home there that he had I'd call it a harness. Yes, let's call it a harness. They attached over his shoulders that would hold his mouth organ. It was very heavy, very long. And he could play those old-time melodies. Then he would chord at the same time on a piano that sounded very full. And he was able to imitate the very same melodies that he had been taught otherwise.
Did you play any instruments?
My brother was a great fiddler. But as far as I'm concerned, I could play. Yes, I could play the violin too, but I didn't take the interest. I had my own orchestra. I had an orchestra consisting of about 5 pieces, sometimes 6. I had 2 clarinets, a cornet, um, a baritone, and a valve trombone together with drums. That's the one I had for a good many years.
When did you start that orchestra?
About the time that I left the university, let's go back to 1925, 26 or thereabouts. So I kept on. I didn't go out and play for dance jobs and like that, but it was just for the pleasure, for as a hobby, for the fun of having it. But we had I'd say a fairly good orchestra. Nothing special, but at least we got together.
Sure. You played music then that you bought, arrangements?
Oh yeah, yes. I was taught the notes, of course. I took violin lessons from my old good friend Kopang. Kopang was a music teacher in Spring Grove, and he's the one that taught me the foundation of musical scores and notes.
Yeah. The very earliest dances then, do you remember, were they just house parties and dances?
Most of them was, yeah, house parties and masquerades, and they had small dance pavilions, and Christmas parties, New Year's parties, more or less. It was more or less to entertain the people. We didn't go out for dance jobs at all, but we did play for the fun of it, and the pay was very small.
Yeah, I imagine they didn't get paid at all, did they, in the early days?
No.
Yeah. Was there a great deal of dancing then at the homes, at these parties?
Oh yes, that's one of the great entertainments. I got to say this for the folks at that age. Let's go back to 1920, even right after the First World War. There was more fun at the home at those dance parties than they can ever dream of today. They would get together and anything was fun, and they had the real old time dances like quadrilles, schottisches, Raylander, and of course the fast polka, the 2/4 time double speed, and of course the old-fashioned 3/4 time waltzes, which is nothing like that today. So I'd say that the boys and girls during those days had more fun in dancing to show off what they could do as far as dancing is concerned than what is going on today.
At that time, did there seem that many of the young people knew the original Norwegian dances? Could they do the Rhinelander as it was done in Norway, or let's say the mazurka?
In that respect, we had to go back to the newcomers. A lot of them were good dancers. We talked about both men and boys, and of course the girls. There was many a girl that came to America. There was a hired girl on the place, and she became a teacher, might say, in knowing how to do the real old-fashioned polka or the old-fashioned Rhinelander. That was difficult, something different, you see. And of course, we call them square dances. That was very popular, and it seemed to take great enjoyment. And of course, when it got to be real dancing, we brought in the old hulling and the springedans. Now that was something different, something that was taught by those newcomers, and that was something special. If you springedans, for instance, now, that was something that took a lot of effort to do. Now the hulling dance is another one. The idea there was to be able to see you could kick the highest
Yeah.
Somebody would hold a hat at the end of a cane, and he'd make a roundabout walk, and then he'd jump into the air and kick, so you could kick that hat off. And the race was to see who could kick the hat off at the highest point.
Oh, yeah. Did you see much of that sort of dancing, or was it just
In
one?
my young days, as I grew up, that's what I grew up with.
Oh,
You see the old-fashioned springedans and the old-fashioned Hollandans, and of course the fast polkas and the mazurkas.
Oh, yeah. Did you? Was there anyone that played hardanger fiddle?
Oh yes, that was a delight to see. That was one of the big things that we were interested in, because that was such a different kind of violin, and they played such a different melody that was new to us at that time, and we cherished that type of music. I can remember different ones that came into our vicinity. Two men especially I can think of now. His name was Odden, and
Was that Gunnar? Gunnar? Odden?
No, Torsten Odden and Illertsen.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very good hardanger players, both of them. And the result was that they went around in the small school districts and gave concerts, which was enjoyed by so many people. They cost, I think it was 10 cents or 25 cents to hear them.
Mm-hmm.
But they performed well, and they brought a lot of interest into the... Then we had another one that lived in our community. His name was Gunnar Kleven.
Oh.
He had the honor of having been asked to play for the king in Norway at that time. So he would be not slow in telling us about that he had played for the king's party on the hardanger violin. He was considered very good.
Mm-hmm. The hardanger violin techniques seemed to die away kind of fast, didn't they? There weren't many that followed up on that type of playing on that instrument. Were there in your area?
It's played differently. It was rather hard to tune correctly. You see, you got to tune the... let me describe a hardanger violin. It has 8 strings. It has 4 strings above the fingerboard, which are called playing strings, E, A, D, and G. Then underneath the fingerboard we have 4 more strings, steel strings they are, and they are also tuned in a different key, but they are more or less harmonious strings.
Mm-hmm.
We don't play the melody on that, but they vibrate according to the tune that is played above.
Mm-hmm.
So they're sympathetic strings, we'd call them.
Yeah. But we haven't seen many people that have carried that tradition on here. Very few in the state today. I can only think of 1 or 2. I mean, the young people didn't seem to pick this up like they did with just the ordinary violin.
There are just a few of those old-time fiddlers that have been able to pick it up. I can name several now. For instance, Einar Gran and his brother Otto Gran both can play the hardanger violin, but not as they used to be in Norway, I presume.
Mm-hmm. Concerning the dances, or just dancing in the homes at parties, was there any feeling among certain people that you shouldn't be dancing, that it might be a sinful thing to do?
Not in our community. It was considered an innocent form of a joy. Mm-hmm. That's about, rather than to sit down and play cards or gossip or tell stories, they resorted to dance. And it was customary, a good friendly neighbor, when he had company, why he would roll up the rug and put the violin to work, to play the fiddle. Mm-hmm. And especially when it come to Euro book, that's Christmas fooling. That was a tradition that was quite prominent at one time when I grew up, and the same thing applied there. We would gather in the bunch, probably 2 or 3 sleigh loads of us would get together in one crowd, and we'd masquerade dress. We'd put on masks and so on. So the idea was that we'd come to a certain place that we had agreed on, and they let us in, and the idea was to guess who is who, and so on. And then, of course, again, we had to bring our fiddler along. My brother was quite a entertainer that way. And then he had somebody playing the piano or the organ. And then the net result was that this friendly neighbor let us take over, and they would roll up the rug and let us dance. And that was the entertainment we had.
Mm-hmm. Was there much singing also at these parties and dances?
No, I wouldn't say there was much singing. We could sing some of those old-fashioned songs like Paul på Haugen, Kjerringa med staven, or many Norwegian blander.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I know which ones you're thinking of there.
Like Aften Solen Smiler, that was a popular number. Hils from Eder Hjemme, that was another one. And of course, the national song, Norwegian national song, Jag älskar vårt land. Kan du glömma gamla Norge? Kjerringa med staven, mellom bakker og berg ut med havet. And then we have Saturday into Sundag, and then Store Videre Flock, and so on. Those were some of the songs that we did get together, but it was not as much in demand. It wouldn't entertain as much as old-time fiddling would do.
Mm-hmm. Was there a time when the house-type parties started to decline and people maybe started going to town for the dances?
With the come of automobiles,
yeah,
it was the end of the old-fashioned house parties. That was the sad departure of, I'd say, barn dance, house parties, and the likes.
Mm-hmm.
It was fun to drive around in an automobile.
Sure, drive into town and imagine they had a dance hall in Spring Grove.
Oh yes, then of course there had to be great halls, you know, prepared probably for a couple hundred couples or more.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had bigger music, more members and so on that would furnish the entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the change.
Yeah. Were there quite a few barn dances in the area? I mean, were there quite a few different barns where they held dances?
Oh, that was one of the popular things. That's one of the things that we like to reminisce about today, about the great big barns. First, the owner would prepare plans and hire his carpenters, snicker, to build his barn. And then we had that famous barn race. That was a real must wherever they built a new barn, was to have a barn race. And when all the great big timbers were raised and fastened, and then of course the carpenters would go to work and finish up, put on the roof and the walls and all, and have it ready for the haying time, which would occur in June, about in June. And then before they hauled the hay into the barn, they had to have a barn dance.
Mm.
That was one of the big things that occurred in all communities, to have that big barn dance. Again, then the owner would hire his music, which again would consist of one fiddler, a piano or organ, and maybe a banjo or a guitar to chord along with him.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course he had to get wax to put on that rough floor so that you were able to swing around.
Uh-huh.
Otherwise it wasn't much to it.
Mm-hmm.
But that was one of the big things that had to be done. And you might say that in our community we might have, or at least half a dozen or more, barn dances throughout the year, because that time it was a prosperous country, and they built new barns very often.
Mm-hmm. One question I might ask you is a little bit difficult for anybody to answer, and that is the quality of certain folk tunes. There definitely were certain tunes that were favorites, more popular with the people. Is there, what would you say would be the characteristics of a real good old time piece of music, a tune that's very popular with all the people? Is there any way that a person can determine what made that particular tune what it is?
And there, I might answer this way that quality music was distinguished through the popularity itself. We had players that could manipulate the violin very fine, but we were not able to strike the right chord that would appeal to the public. But we did get some then that would be very much in demand. I can name a few that you might say are probably the more popular ones. I'd have to name Andrew, who played Andrew Walson, Gustav Ellingsen. He formulated a lot of his own composition, and Einar Gran and Otto Gran became very famous as a team. They played for the past, say, 50 years. They played together, became very popular and very good. Then we have others that could also fit into the same category, like Gunnar Kleven. He was one that played quite a bit, and the popularity depended on the quality of music they could produce.
Hmm. So it had a lot to do with the musicians.
Yes. Yeah.
A good musician can make maybe a poor tune sound a little better than it is.
Well, we had temporary players, and for instance, now two were engaged to play for certain dance. Then we had a few others that would like to take over a little bit for a piece or two, just to get the practice or for fun to try it out.
Mm-hmm.
And that way we were able to find who were the leaders.
Now, in tunes that became popular, would you say that maybe they have a melody that people like more than other melodies, a melody they could whistle or sing very well, or would you say that maybe there was a certain rhythm in the tune that appealed to their dancing, or would it be a combination of both? Or
some of those melodies were sounded more or less a sorrowful note. It could be somebody that tried to produce a melody that pertained to his own life. Maybe I can think of one now, Ole Dollar. He contributed a great piece of music that to the music lovers. It had to do with the death of his wife. It got to be a very sad melody, and it was often you could see women especially would dry their tears after listening to that tune. Mm-hmm. Then we'd have another one. Now we had Andrew Walson. That's one tune that got to be so popular.